Imagine not hearing from God for 10 years. And the first thing he says is, let me reintroduce myself, because you've obviously forgotten. Abraham was called not just to exist, but to be a blessing. He was called to represent God, to be a good thing in people's lives. But so far in Abram's story, this was far from the case. You see, he wasn't being a reflection of God. He was being the opposite. He was being a curse. Because of his deceitful actions toward Pharaoh, he brought a curse upon Pharaoh's land. Because of his silence, he allowed for Hagar, the servant, to be abused by his wife, the same Hagar who ran away from him and had to get God's protection against him. And God goes silent on Abram. You see, after the abuse that Hagar suffered, it says 10 years passed until God spoke to Abram again. And when he speaks, he starts with a very strong reprimand. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Almighty God. I'm all-powerful. I am El Shaddai. He commands Abraham, the way you need to walk needs to be blameless, i.e. it's time to straighten your act, boy. And we know it was very strong and frightening confrontation because Abraham falls to his face. But God says this, he recalls his covenant with Abraham, and he said, no longer will you be called Abram, you will now be called Abraham, for you will be a father of nations. When he comes back to Abraham after 10 years, he says, you need to change your name and you need to change how you move. And he does the same with Sarai, from Sarai to Sarah, the mother of nations. But this time, God requires a price. He says, every male in your household, including yourself, including your son, will be circumcised. Now, what I find interesting about the circumcision is the very body part that Abraham used to almost disobey God when he slept with Hagar to have a baby. God is saying, be blameless in this aspect. Cut off a piece of that. Not use that for disobedience. Be fruitful and multiply, but be fruitful and multiply in the way that I have instructed, not by your own scheming and trying to make things happen. We know this because even though Abraham and Hagar ended up having a child called Ishmael, and this child is now 10 years old, 10 years from the time that God went silent on Abraham, Abraham tries to get God to bless Ishmael. He says, Lord, can you not do your works through Ishmael? And God says, no, Ishmael was never my plan. Ishmael was your plan. He says, I will bless Ishmael because it's not his fault, but I will establish my covenant with Isaac who's still yet to come. God isn't going to adjust what his vision was, what his plan was, who he establishes a covenant with, just because we try to make things happen for ourselves. And what's interesting is through all their scheming and planning that Abraham and Sarah did, 10 years later, God is still saying, you haven't moved. You still have to believe in me, have faith in me for the child that I will give you. And they're right back off where they started 20 years ago when God said, I will give you a child. So by pursuing this counterfeit avenue, i.e. trying to get another child through Hagar and Ishmael ending up being the counterfeit, they ended up wasting time and causing themselves hurt when they could have just stayed where they were and waited on God. But God is faithful. And even though he went quiet on him for 10 years, he still comes back and says, let's give this another try. And this time, Abraham is more fit for the task.